The parking lot was nearly empty. Streetlights flickered in the cold wind. A young woman stumbled backward, terrified. Three men closed in, their laughter echoing against the concrete. A little girl gripped her father's hand tightly. "Daddy, please help her," she whispered. Her voice was small, but it hit him like a thunderclap. The veteran didn't hesitate. He stepped forward. Calm, measured, dangerous. The men laughed at first. 10 seconds later, they weren't laughing. And 2 days later, a Navy Admiral knocked on his door. Mark Sullivan lived a life measured in minutes and routines. At 44, the former Navy veteran moved with a precision recognized only by those who had served in the silent corners of the world. He was a man of few words and even fewer visible scars. But the scars were there, hidden beneath his heavy flannel shirts and tucked away in the deepest vaults of his mind. Every morning began at 5:30 a.m. His internal clock was still set to the rhythm of a ship's bell, a relic of a decade spent on the churning gray waters of the Pacific and the humid jungles of Southeast Asia. Standing in the kitchen as dawn filtered through the window, he breathed in a silence earned through years of shouting over helicopter rotors, the roar of jet engines, and the rhythmic staccato of gunfire. He enjoyed the stillness. It was the only time the echoes of his past stayed quiet. He was a single father to 8-year-old Ellie. His world revolved around her. Early mornings were tactical, packing school lunches with the edges cut exactly right, never a crust left behind, and lining up her shoes by the door in a perfect row. He was the anchor in her small world, the steady hand keeping her afloat in a sea of childhood uncertainty. He took pride in the small things, the way her hair smelled like strawberry shampoo, the way she hummed when she was focused on a drawing, and the way she still held his hand when they crossed the street. His wife, Sarah, had been gone for 5 years. A long, exhausting illness had taken her piece by piece. Mark had been her medic, her rock, and her witness. He had cared for her until her final breath, showing a bravery far different from what he'd learned in the SEAL teams. Out there, courage was lightning, a sudden, violent flash of action. At home, it was a slow-burning candle, staying bright even as the wax ran out. He had watched her fight with a dignity that made his military medals feel like cheap trinkets. After the funeral, he had carefully folded his uniform, tucked his medals into a velvet-lined drawer, and stepped into the shadows of civilian life. He didn't want to be Chief Sullivan anymore. He just wanted to be Ellie's dad. He worked now as a security consultant for a local firm, auditing blueprints and fence lines for warehouses. It was low-profile work that required focus, but didn't demand his soul. It paid the mortgage and kept him home by 4 p.m. every day. He didn't miss the adrenaline that used to make his blood sing. He preferred the quiet satisfaction of a completed grocery list. He had built a wall between his past and his present, a wall he hoped would protect Ellie from the darkness he had seen. Ellie was observant and kind, with her mother's inquisitive, bright eyes. She knew her father was different from the other dads at the playground. He didn't shout at the TV during football games or get angry when someone cut him off in traffic. He was a mountain, still, silent, and immovable. She felt safer in his shadow than anywhere else on earth. She often watched him when he thought she wasn't looking, seeing the way his eyes would sometimes drift to the horizon, as if he were scanning for a storm that only he could see. That Tuesday evening, a biting frost settled over the suburbs. Mark and Ellie stopped at the local grocery store for the basics: milk, bread, and a small chocolate bar for Ellie because she had aced her spelling test. The store was humming with the comforting mundanity of suburban life. But the moment they stepped back out into the parking lot, the atmosphere changed. The air felt thin, electric with a tension that Mark recognized instantly. He felt the shift before he saw the cause. A prickle at the base of his neck, a sudden narrowing of his peripheral vision. His eyes scanned the perimeter instinctively, mapping exits and blind spots. Several halogen lamps flickered with a dying, sickly orange light, casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. He noticed the tension immediately. 3 shadows were converging on a silver sedan parked in the far, poorly lit corner. A young woman, barely 20, was cornered. 3 men in heavy, oversized hoodies were blocking her car door, invading her space with a predatory, mocking confidence. Their voices were low and jagged, the kind of laughter that didn't reach the eyes. They were testing her, pushing to see when she would break. Mark didn't run. He didn't shout. He assessed the situation with a cold, analytical clarity. Distance, 40 yards. Angles, clustered, making them vulnerable to a flanking maneuver. He saw the woman's knuckles white as she gripped her car keys like a pathetic, desperate weapon. She was looking for an exit that didn't exist. She was a bird caught in a snare, and the predators were starting to pull the string. "Daddy?" Ellie whispered. Her hand tightened around his until her small fingers were white. She felt the sudden, terrifying stillness in his arm, the way his muscles turned from flesh to granite. Her father's face changed. The dad mask remained, but the warrior had woken up behind his eyes. The mountain wasn't just standing there anymore. It was preparing to move. Human Mark. Ellie's small voice becomes louder than Mark's haunting memories of war. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but he was still a protector. "Ellie, listen to me," Mark said. His voice was a low, soothing hum, the kind of tone a bomb technician uses. "Step behind me. Stay close to my leg. Don't let go of the grocery cart. No matter what happens, you stay behind the cart." He moved. His stride was long and effortless, covering the 40 yards with a startling, silent speed. He didn't rush. Rushing creates panic, and panic is for the unprepared. He approached the silver sedan with the inevitability of a rising tide reclaiming the shore. "Evening," Mark said as he closed the distance. He stopped exactly 10 feet away, the reaction gap that allowed him to move before they could reach him. His hands were visible, palms slightly open and relaxed, but his weight was perfectly balanced on the balls of his feet. He looked like a man out for a stroll, but he was a coiled spring. The three men spun around. The leader, a man in a scuffed leather jacket with a scarred chin and hollow eyes, laughed. He saw a middle-aged man in a faded jacket and a little girl. He didn't see the threat. He only saw an easy target. "Beat it, old man," the leader sneered, stepping away from the girl's car to face Mark. "This isn't your business. Go home and watch the news before you get hurt in front of your kid." Mark didn't react emotionally. He didn't puff out his chest or respond to the insult. He simply shifted his weight an inch to the left, centering his gravity. He positioned himself strategically, blocking their direct path to the woman while monitoring the two men on the flanks. He was a chess player, seeing 10 moves ahead. His voice remained steady, as cool as the winter air. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you know these men?" The woman shook her head frantically, a desperate, choked "no" escaping her throat. Her eyes were wide, looking at Mark not as a savior, but as another victim about to be claimed. She looked like she was about to faint. The men stepped closer, trying to circle him, their movements jagged and uncoordinated compared to Mark's stillness. Mark stepped back diagonally, a simple pivot that kept all three in his field of vision. The air felt heavy now, charged with the static preceding a lightning strike. "Last warning," the leader said, his voice rising in frustration as Mark's lack of fear began to unnerve him. He stepped into Mark's personal space and shoved Mark's shoulder with the palm of his hand. "Move! Now! Or the kid watches you bleed on the concrete." Mark didn't stumble. He didn't even sway. He deflected the shove smoothly, rolling his shoulder to redirect the force into the ground. He didn't strike back. He just looked the man in the eyes. In that moment, the leader saw something that turned his blood to ice. He didn't see anger. He saw a profound professional competence. He saw eyes that had looked at much worse men in much darker places. He saw a man who wasn't fighting for pride, but for the safety of the two women behind him. He saw a man who was currently deciding whether or not it was necessary to dismantle him. Mark's voice dropped to a whisper, a sound that carried more weight than a scream. "The girl is watching. She is learning what a man is. If you move your hand again, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Walk away while you still have the choice." The leader hesitated. His two friends looked at each other, the bravado draining out of them. They weren't soldiers. They were cowards who bullied the weak, and they had just realized they were standing in front of a ghost they couldn't haunt. Headlights from a passing car swept across them, bright and accusing. Other shoppers emerged from the store, their voices carrying across the lot. The isolation they relied on was broken. The world was watching. The leader looked at his friends, then back at Mark. He saw Mark's poised hands, the way his fingers were ready to strike, and his absolute lack of hesitation. "Whatever," the leader muttered, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "She's not worth the trouble. Let's go, boys. This guy's a freak." They retreated into the shadows, their footsteps hurried and irregular. They disappeared into the dark, leaving behind only the smell of stale cigarettes and fear. The woman collapsed against her car, sobbing with jagged, racking relief. She slid down the side of the door until she was sitting on the cold asphalt. Ellie stepped out from behind the cart and hugged Mark's waist, her small frame shaking. Mark didn't boast. He didn't tell her how lucky they were. He reached into his pocket and handed the woman a clean tissue. "Take your time," he said gently, his voice returning to the dad tone. "The police are on their way. My daughter and I will stay right here until they arrive." He stayed as a silent guardian for 20 minutes, shielding her from the wind until the color returned to her cheeks, and the flashing blue lights appeared on the horizon. He stood between her and the world, a human shield that didn't need to be asked. Once the officers took over, Mark knelt to Ellie's height. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, weary calm. He took her small, cold face in his hands and looked into her eyes. He wanted her to remember this moment not as a fight, but as a choice. "Human Mark," Mark says softly, "helping doesn't mean hurting Ellie. Real strength is knowing you have the power to destroy, but choosing to heal instead. We protect because we love. Remember that when you're scared. Love is the only thing stronger than fear." Spoke about situational awareness and de-escalation. The woman, whose name was Maya, told officers Mark was a guardian angel who had appeared out of the dark, standing like a wall between her and a nightmare. Surveillance footage from the store was pulled that night. In the dark, quiet rooms of the precinct, veteran officers watched the video over and over. They didn't see a common brawl. They watched a masterclass in tactical positioning. They saw a man who moved like a shadow and stood like a fortress wall. The footage circulated through the department, then to the state investigators, until it reached eyes that recognized the Sullivan name from old classified files that were never supposed to be open. Mark returned home, tucked Ellie in, and sat in the dark of his living room. He didn't turn on the TV. He just sat, listening to the house breathe. He wanted to return to the silence, to the life where he was just a man who fixed fences and packed lunches. He thought he had succeeded in burying the warrior. 2 days later, the silence was broken by the low, expensive hum of a large engine. A black government SUV with tinted windows pulled into his modest driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel. Ellie was at the window, her eyes wide. "Daddy, there's a very fancy car outside, and a man with gold on his shoulders getting out. He looks like a statue." Mark's posture shifted instinctively. The tired dad vanished. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted, and a sharpness returned to his gaze. The warrior returned not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated respect for the rank he saw approaching. A Navy Admiral stepped out in full-dress blues, his chest a tapestry of service ribbons and gold stars. He looked like an icon of authority carved out of oak. Mark opened the door before the Admiral could even raise his hand to knock. They stood on the porch, a retired chief and a serving flag officer, the suburban setting feeling suddenly too small for the weight of the moment. "Chief Petty Officer Sullivan," the Admiral said, extending a hand that was as firm as a vice. "It's been a long time since I saw your name on a briefing." "Admiral Richardson," Mark replied, his voice raspy. "What are you doing here, sir?" "I'm a civilian now." The Admiral stepped inside, his presence filling the modest home. He looked at the half-finished Lego set on the floor, the photo of Sarah on the mantel, and the quiet dignity of the space. He looked at Ellie peeking from the kitchen, her eyes full of curiosity. "The woman you helped," the Admiral began, his voice thick with a raw, paternal emotion he couldn't hide. "Her name is Maya. She's a brilliant student, a kind soul, and the light of my life. She's my only daughter, Mark. She told me what you did. She told me you stood there like a wall of fire and didn't blink when they threatened you." Mark felt the air leave his lungs. He hadn't known. To him, she was just a person in trouble, a citizen. I watched the footage, Mark. I saw how you handled yourself. I reopened your service record. The redacted missions in Yemen, the operations in Africa that were never supposed to exist. I saw the medals you never mentioned to your neighbors, the ones you keep in a drawer. Mark's jaw tightened. I was just being a human being, sir. It wasn't about the Navy. It was about a girl who was scared and a daughter who was watching. I didn't do it for a file. It's about character, Mark. It always is. A man with your skills shouldn't be living in total anonymity while the world needs examples of courage. I want to authorize a formal commendation, a public ceremony at the base. The governor wants to give you a medal for civilian bravery. You'd be a hero on every news station by morning. You could have a new career, any position you want. Mark looked at Ellie. He thought about the peace they had found, the quiet mornings and the men he had lost who would never get a parade. He thought about the weight of a spotlight and how it would change the way Ellie saw the world. He shook his head slowly, a sad but resolute smile on his face. With all due respect, Admiral, no. Please. The Admiral frowned, genuinely surprised. Mark, you deserve this. Your daughter deserves to see her father honored by the nation. It would be a legacy. My daughter knows who I am, Mark said firmly, his voice echoing in the small room. If I take that medal, I'm telling her that glory is the goal. I'm telling her that we only do the right thing if there's a camera and a crowd. I want her to know we help because it's the right thing to do, even if no one ever finds out. I want her to know that a man's worth isn't measured in gold stars, but in the people he keeps safe when no one is looking. Symbol rejected. Mark rejects the spotlight for quiet integrity. He chooses the love of his daughter over the applause of the world. My daughter doesn't need applause, Mark concluded. She needs an example. And a real example doesn't need a stage. It just needs to be there at the breakfast table every morning. The Admiral stared at him with profound silent respect. He realized he was looking at a man who had truly mastered himself. He took off his cover and bowed his head slightly, a gesture of humility. You're a better man than most, Sullivan. Maya is safe because of you. I will honor your wish. You have my word, no cameras. But you also have my gratitude, forever. The house felt different that evening. The air was charged with a sense of closure. Ellie sat on the rug, staring at the door where the Admiral had stood. Daddy? Was that man a king? He had so much gold. Mark laughed, a warm, genuine sound. He walked to the hallway and pulled out a locked drawer he hadn't opened in years. He sat with her on the rug and opened a cedar box. Inside, the medals caught the dim light. The silver star, the bronze star, the purple heart. These are from when I was a sailor, Ellie, he said softly. I traveled far to help people. I was part of a team of very brave men. We did things that were hard, and sometimes we were very scared. Are you a hero? She asked, touching the purple heart with a tiny, reverent finger. Mark shook his head, his eyes misting over. No, baby. I was a man who was afraid, but did his job anyway because he loved the people standing next to him. Real heroes are like your mom. She fought a war against her own body every day and never complained. These medals, they're just reminders of people I loved. They aren't who I am. Who I am is your dad. He spent an hour teaching her that bravery isn't the absence of fear. Fear is what makes bravery possible. He told her that doing the right thing when it's hard is the only thing that matters in the end. He watched her process the weight of it, her young mind grasping the concept of selfless service. A few days later, Maya visited. She didn't come with guards or fanfare. She brought homemade cookies and a stack of books for Ellie. She sat on their porch and talked for hours about her dreams of becoming a doctor, about how she wanted to help people too. Before leaving, she knelt down and hugged Ellie tightly. Your daddy is the bravest man I've ever met, she whispered in the girl's ear. But you saved me too because you had the courage to ask him to help. You were the spark, Ellie. Never forget that. Ellie beamed, her chest swelling with a new kind of confidence. She realized courage didn't have to be loud or violent. It could be a whisper in a dark parking lot. It could be a choice to care when others walk away. Months passed. The incident faded into a local story, a whisper in the community, and then eventually into silence. The world moved on, but the three of them were changed forever. Mark continued the grocery runs and the school drop-offs. He remained the man in the faded jacket that no one noticed, the guy who checked the fences and packed the lunches. The Admiral kept his word. No cameras, no press. Instead, a monthly handwritten letter arrived, giving Mark updates on Maya's progress in school. A private bond of gratitude was forged in that silence, stronger than any public award. One Saturday evening, Mark and Ellie found themselves in that same parking lot. The sun cast long, purple shadows across the asphalt. The halogen lights hummed with their familiar, buzzing tune. It looked exactly the same as it did that night. Ellie held his hand, standing tall and confident. She didn't hide behind the cart anymore. She looked at the silver sedan parked a few rows over, then up at her father. "Daddy, would you do it again? Even if the Admiral didn't say thank you? Even if no one ever knew?" Mark didn't hesitate. He squeezed her hand, feeling the strength in her grip. "Always," he said, his voice as steady as the mountain. "Because that's who we are, Ellie. We're the ones who stand up when others sit down." They walked toward their car through the gathering twilight, two figures against the fading light. They weren't heroes to the world, but they were everything to each other. Mark realized that Sarah would have been proud. He hadn't just protected Ellie. He had taught her how to be a light in the dark. Final message: real strength doesn't seek conflict. It doesn't look for a fight or a stage. It moves in silence. It waits in the shadows of the everyday. And it steps forward only when the world feels cold and someone whispers, "Please help." If you believe that stories of healing and inspiration like this need to be spread, please leave a comment and subscribe to CPH Healing Stories. We tell stories that should never be forgotten. Because true heroes don't wear capes. They wear old jackets and hold their daughter's hand through the storms.